And Ed O'Neal, word to Ed O'Neal, he says, if Z signs, we need an I'm fired up from Kool-Aid. You already know. When we saw this video last night, Flannel, I sent it to you immediately. It was like, bro, like crying emojis. We got a victory lap this. This is something we've been trying to will, and we've continued to conjecture. Maybe this is just old man stuff, OG stuff. Maybe this is just what the Lions are doing because he's an older player. Brad Holmes said, hey, I put the fielders out there already. We had already heard from Brad as it relates to that. Been in touch with Z, been in touch with his representation. He knows what we can do. And what have we seen out of Big Z? That man has just been more and more and more Detroit. Just wherever Cash Doll is, he's been there to support her. And then we just see him, decked out in the Detroit gear. But should we show the people what video kind of took over social media?
Yes, sir. Got that one, JB?
When you signing that contract with the Lions? Soon. Okay, that's all I need to hear. When you signing that contract with the Lions? Soon. Okay, that's all I need to hear.
Well, I'm fired up anyway from you, man, with the buffs on. And you know what I like? The way my man started to smile as soon as he heard Lions. He looks ecstatic. And I'm hoping that this is a whole lot more sizzle to the steak. I'm really hoping this is more steak than sizzle with Za'Darius Smith. Not just conjecture, not just put on the spot, but this is a situation where we're going to see Za'Darius Smith as that bookend for Aiden Hutchinson. We were just talking about this just yesterday. Talking about this.
Yeah, and all right, just to clarify one thing before we get going, I did say that yesterday if it came down to Jair Alexander or Za'Darius Smith, I would prefer the Lions to sign Jair Alexander. However, that is far less likely, and that does not mean that I don't want Za'Darius Smith. In fact, bring them both in. You can afford it, but that's another story for another day. Of course I want Za'Darius Smith on this team, and it's encouraging to see him just answer the question in the way that he answered it. I don't know what it means. Hopefully it means something. But one thing, though, that continues to give me a little bit of cause for pause. I want to come in. I want a victory lap. I want to get excited, but he's still not here. This is just a gut feeling, and it goes off of what I've heard from him.
That Detroit skepticism I talked about.
But I think there's merit to it. Oh. I don't think Brad Holmes views Za'Darius Smith like we do. I think we view Za'Darius Smith as essential. I think Brad Holmes views Za'Darius Smith as luxury. I think that Brad Holmes feels perfectly comfortable with Marcus Davenport as edge 2 in conjunction with AQM and Josh Pascal. I think that it's with Za'Darius Smith, it's only for the right price. And let's just be honest. The way that Big Z has played, not just this year, but in the previous couple of seasons, I don't think he necessarily has to take a discount if he doesn't want to. And don't get me wrong, he hasn't signed with anybody else yet, so maybe the interest is low. But at the end of the day, I think if Brad Holmes actually viewed Za'Darius Smith as essential, he would have never released him in the first place, even with the money, even with the dead cap next year. But to me, bring Big Z home. I think this would ease a lot of my trepidations about even the first 7 games or so, or even the whole season. I think Z would do excellently as the bookend to Aiden Hutchinson.
I'm looking at the chat here. Weezy313. Welcome to the chat, brother. Our resident Za'Darius hater. He says that I would take Jair over Za'Darius too.
I'm not mad at that.
He's mad that he missed that segment. But Ed O'Neal, I see you, says if we signed Smith, I'd feel more comfortable having Davenport as a rotational piece. Me too. When you talk about believing in Marcus Davenport, you would think that it would be nice to have some more depth there so that you're not relying so much on players who, in the past, availability has been a question mark. I don't want to have those types of questions. If we can find some way to mitigate and limit that with players that you believe in their talent, nobody says that if Davenport's healthy, everyone believes if Davenport is healthy, he's going to perform, he's going to contribute for your team. But I do believe, more so even than keeping him healthy during the season, keeping them healthy and having just that much more stamina, like we saw with the Eagles through the playoffs, like we saw with the Eagles in the championship, in the Super Bowl. I do believe that type of stuff matters. It helps. We talk about what bringing in these young players does for their tandems in their rotation. We talk about what having the depth at linebacker last year did for this team, where they literally were like, hey, you know what, depth to all the linebackers. And Jack Campbell was just sitting there looking around like Will Smith at the end of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was absolutely crazy. So for me, you already know, Za'Darius Smith has been a constant refrain. Draft season, before draft season, after draft season, OTAs, it's been a constant refrain. Not that I believe that he's some world beater, but we don't know who Za'Darius Smith could be against on the opposite end of the world beater in Aiden Hutchinson. On this revamped defensive line with who Brad Holmes is saying is a hungry Tyreek Williams. I do believe that this team is going to be in a better position to support Za'Darius Smith when last year it was Za'Darius Smith who had to do a little bit more pulling than the team could push. I do want to see Za'Darius Smith here with the Lions, and that's where, no, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid saying that he's going to be this all-pro defensive end, but I do believe he's going to have an impactful season even better than we saw last year if he's playing opposite of Aiden Hutchinson.
You don't need him to be an all-pro defensive end. And I think Flannel is correct. I mean, Brad Holmes would like him on the team, but not really. He's really not going to go out right now. I think he's trying to gnaw him down to a certain cap figure.
That's our GM.
If Za'Darius Smith is not on this team, it's going to be because of Brad Holmes.
100,000%. And I'm not saying that it's just this necessarily going to be a catastrophic mistake or anything like that. Only time will tell. I don't want to put stuff like that out there until we see the season. But yeah, 100% Terry's correct.
Hold on. Do you agree with this? Weezy 3-3. Bro, I didn't know who AQM was. AQM is just as good as Z at this point.
I'm glad you mentioned that because JB Smooth. It's funny. You think I just come in here all blind and just say stuff just to say it. I have a couple of graphics on Za'Darius Smith. You put up the shorter one. The shorter one really quick. Pressure rates last 3 seasons.
Just throwing lobs up, huh?
Za'Darius Smith, and this is over the last 3 seasons because 2021 Z was out for most of the year and Josh Pascal's career has been 3 years. I thought that was a pretty good gauge. Pressure rates the last 3 seasons. Za'Darius Smith 15.1%, Marcus Davenport 11.4%, which is actually fine. It's good, but on a very, very small sample size. Al-Qadim Muhammad, 9.3%, and Josh Pascal, 7.5%. So yes, Big Z over the last 3 years has greatly outperformed. We all know he outperformed all of these guys when it came to availability, counting stats like sacks and hits and tackles for losses, but even the pressures, Za'Darius Smith blows them out of the water. But I have an even longer one when it compares Za'Darius Smith to elite edges in the league. If you would put that one up, JB Smooth, which shows maybe he actually has been a world beater. Pressure rates the last 3 seasons. Micah Parsons, 18.3%, but I keep hearing he's overrated. That's a me thing. I'll move on. Nick Bosa, 16.9%. Myles Garrett, 16.5%. Trey Hendrickson, 16.4%. Za'Darius Smith, 15.1%, ahead of Aiden Hutchinson at 14.8%, Max Crosby at 12.9%, and TJ Watt at 12%. So over the past 3 seasons, even though he maybe isn't putting up the all-pros and the sack numbers that all of these guys are, he's still been very, very good and very, very impactful. And imagine what he could be opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I am more bullish about Za'Darius Smith than ever right now, even though I'd still rather have Jair. But the gap is closing. The gap is closing. And he certainly would be the second best pass rusher on the team. No question about it.
Hey,
you don't want Jair over Za'Darius Smith. Give me pressure anytime because the league rules don't favor cornerbacks. They don't allow cornerbacks to be shut down corners. So, but if you put the heat on somebody, then you make cornerbacks better.
And you know what? I agree with that too. And that's why I see Lunchbox here. He says, so now we're worrying about pressure rates. Lunchbox, absolutely wrong show.
Absolutely wrong show. I literally almost had like a heart attack at 31 fighting Neil Rule about Hutch's pressure.
That's what I'm saying. Like this is exactly like, especially right after what Terry says, like this is not the show.
This is not the show.
We were the ones that talked about how good it was, and we talked about how the Detroit Lions were still able to manufacture pressure last year, despite not getting the sack totals that you want to see, especially after they got devastated we continue to talk about on Woo about the pressure that they were manufacturing. I sat in that sound booth for Cavassier listening to this man to my right defend Aiden Hutchinson on the premise of the pressures do matter, despite the fact that you still wanted to see him get those sack totals.
Well, and I know some people are mentioning his pressure rate Z's over the past 3 years is higher than Hutch's. If I want to give one bit of context to that, that does include Aiden Hutchinson's rookie year, when we all know he wasn't what he was. He took a big sophomore jump, and obviously we know what he did last year. So Hutch's pressure rate over the past 2 seasons, I don't have that number right in front of me, is probably close to what guys like Parsons and Bosa's are. So Hutch is definitely the better end and better at getting pressures. But still, I'm not even saying Z's as good as those guys, but the fact that he's getting pressure at a rate close to guys like Bosa and Parsons and ahead of guys like TJ, MF, and Watt is insane.
It is insane.
Pressure rate is very important. Back in the day when I was doing stories on why do the Lions suck, and I would call people around the NFL and basically ask them that, and they said the one thing they said is the Lions don't put heat on opposing quarterbacks. Opposing quarterbacks are back in the pocket, patting the ball, looking around, deciding my 5th, 6th option, and they still don't have that heat. They said basically the Lions were in that heat because A, they don't put heat on the other quarterbacks, and B, they don't protect their own quarterback. So somebody's making fun of pressure rates, shame on you, because I've been hearing for years that's the thing the Lions needed, and maybe they would have been better sooner if they did this, but they didn't think that way.
Absolutely. I see Hoof in the chart, Hoof Hearted, he says people want Z because the Lions D-line is elite at the run, but under average on sacking the quarterback. And Z gives exactly what the Lions are lacking on the line. Exactly that. You see it, what they're doing even to try and beef up and to give more depth to that interior. It only makes sense to me, especially if you're talking about supporting your Davenport signing, that you do bring back a Big Z. And you know what? You said something very, very important to me, T. Foss, earlier when talking about Za'Darius Smith, and that was that Brad Holmes. I think that this is him saying, you know what? I still run this. We're going to have our standards. We're going to have our people that we like, but we're not going to break one of the standards that will help us win now and long term, and that is also how they manage the cap. No matter how much people can say, but, you know, because I keep going back and forth over this. As they're starting to spend more and more money is where my mind continues to go more on the lines of maybe he did need to pinch just a little bit more from Big Z. And I know there's some others, because I was on this other side before. It's like, nah, but it's Big Z. You got him underneath controllability. It's not that much money. But now that I'm looking at it, Brian Holmes and the job he's going to have to do, and you're just shelling out big contract after big contract and historical contracts and setting the market, now is where I do believe maybe he is, not just for the big contracts to come, but for the flexibility of this team, even to make smaller moves and smaller signings. Think about some of the deals they made to bring back guys. In what was it, about $6 million or so, I think that they saved with Big Z, with how they cut him. You look at some of those smaller signings that they did, and you can see exactly what the Lions are trying to do.
Right, but you know what happens a lot of times. I think this is happening in this case. Brad Holmes is saying, "Hey, dumbass media, don't tell me what to do. Dumbass fans, don't tell me what to do. I know better." And what's going to happen, he's going to go through all this ring around the rosy stuff and say how unimportant an edge rusher is. He's going to say it over and over and over again. Then at the very end, guess what he's going to get? An edge rusher. And he'll come up with some cockamamie excuse. Well, you know, it just fell in our lap, and we like good ball players, and so I brought him in.
Yeah, and I just want to respond to Wheezy really quick, and then Terry, and then I'll throw it over to Justin. Wheezy basically said, let's be damned, Z can't touch Hutch. Z can't touch Hutch, he can't touch Watt, and he can't touch Crosby. It's just an amazing stat that he gets pressure at a rate higher than all of them. I'm not saying he's as good, but that's the point about getting a Za'Darius Smith in, and that's also the reason why if I'm Big Z and Brad Holmes wants to really lowball me, he absolutely has the right, if Brad Holmes is like, here's $7 million, to basically say, here's that $7 million. I'm worth more. And maybe that's what's happening right now. And Terry, I wanted to respond to what you said about Brad Holmes. And this is where I'm going to have the whole chat and probably the whole room against me.
Oh, no.
And because I think you might actually understand my point. That's one of the reasons why I don't really like Brad Holmes, the guy. I think he's kind of a douche. Am I wrong? I think he's kind of a
But
dick.
you don't like the swag.
I don't like him. I like
You
what
know
he's
why?
done.
You know why?
He's a
Because
douche.
he is the embodiment of aura.
No, but he's the embodiment of condescension. He thinks I have an IQ of 5. And I understand, and I'm not trying to be sensitive because he hasn't said anything directly to me, but I just don't like him.
Voice of reason, get ready.
I think that interview he did on the flagship where he was talking about, you guys just want 2 Aidens. That was the most straw man BS thing I've ever heard in my life. Good job as a GM, though. I just don't like him.
But the people do. The people want 2 Aidens. You look at the
No, they
socials.
don't. They literally don't.
Everyone, how many people are crying for Max Crosby?
Okay, fine. And that,
Look at intern Ryan raised his hand.
all you have to do to get that whitewashed from
They're
history
still
is to
crying.
be a Brad Bosch.
How many are still saying, dude, he still got a chance with Trey Hendrickson?
But we're talking about Za'Darius Smith. We're talking about Clowney, too. Like, people aren't like, we got to sign Trey Hendrickson or bust.
Not the most vocal, though. Even though we're sitting here and we go through the full gamut, most of the people out there, and Justin can tell you too, man, when you look at the socials, most people out there are screaming for the 2 Aiden Hutchinsons.
Yeah, and stop, folks. What before the draft? What did every mock draft say? What did every fan say? Oh, they're gonna draft a edge rusher in the first round. Oh, didn't do that? Okay, they're gonna draft an edge rusher in the second round. He waited to the 6th round and drafted some dude from Egypt. He's telling you it's not important.
I even saw him on the podium during the press conference for that, saying, "Yeah, I did that just to spite Flannel."
Okay,
I heard
obviously I don't think that, but I think Wheezy put it perfectly. He's petty. You should call him Tom or Richard. That's his actual first name instead
But
of Brad,
I feel like
because he's Tom or Richard
I feel
Petty.
like when you've earned that petty, I feel like you've Brad Holmes has a right to be able to call that swagger aura. Like when we see other people do these types of things, we're just, oh my gosh, and we put him up on the mantle. Bill Belichick. How many people put him up on the mantle when he's the? And I know you don't.
He's got 6 Super Bowls, dude. Come on.
No, you are in sports. You earn the right to be a dick. You do.
That's it. But people were already doing this even before the Super Bowls. We understand how people do in sports. You put on any aspect of an image that resonates, and people start to latch. And what they're doing with Brad Holmes right now is the fact that the Lions, he's changed the course of their franchise, something that people thought was impossible. So I do understand with this guy who's come from an organization too, who he did help set up to win a Super Bowl. Nobody can say that he didn't. Brad Holmes was a part of that culture. He was out there with the Rams. Came here, and what has he done? He's instantly transformed this culture. So I'm not trying to compare him in Bill Belichick as it relates to the rings. I'm talking about even players who don't have rings in the NFL, who will put on a certain aura if they just get in the stats, and people latch on to that type of stuff, and they support that type of stuff. And you know what a lot of people do? They brand off of this stuff. They buy their jerseys and their shoes off this stuff. They want to play them in the video games off this. Why can't Brad Holmes be that? Because I do believe, just short of a Super Bowl, this man has been working miracles. Nobody thought that this type of stuff was possible. I'm talking about this fast as well. That's what blew my mind when you were talking about the Lions and what this organization has been. And that's why I do believe Brad Holmes, he deserves for people to be able to parse it a little bit better, in my opinion. People are saying he's doing the wrong things.
I am so reluctant to criticize him because I know you guys don't want to hear this. This was the most pathetic organization in all of pro sports.
Literally.
It was awful, and the way they ran things was atrocious. The way they ran off players. Now, look at this. Here's something that never happened the last 60 years of Lions football. And I dare even Sam, Mr. Research, to find this. You never, ever had a player saying, I want to be a Detroit Lion. Please make me a Detroit Lion. It used to be, get me as far away from this pathetic organization as possible. Now you got to do like, hey, I'll do anything to be here. Za'Darius Smith he knows there's a path to a Super Bowl here. He likes the climate. His woman is here. He's hanging out in the hood. He's doing everything he can to show you, I want to be here. I demand to be here. And he's going to take a pay cut to do that.
And I think that it's just really funny that you say that like Brad Holmes is a sort of dick or petty, whatever word you want to use.
How about dickish?
Yeah, sure. But he's never as big of a dick as Patricia was. Patricia was such a dick for no reason, and he never showed anything. At least when you look at Brad Holmes, you're like, all right, I mean, man's got a track record. He knows what he's doing. He's built this team, like you said, from the most pathetic team in football to one of the monoliths of the entire
in sports,
NFL.
Bro, the most pathetic in sports is
Literally.
what a lot of people would have told you.
And so you're like, he's at a point where like he deserves to be. Like he literally deserves to be. We should be kissing the ground that he walks on for the memories that he has made us over the past 3 years. Straight up.
And that's where I get off the highway with you at the end, because obviously Matt Patricia was awful. He was a dick. He deserves to go to sports hell when he dies. Not actual hell, but sports hell. Or Detroit hell, because he actually did some nice things with
How about the All-Dick Hall of Fame?
Sure, the All-Dick Hall of Fame.
Well, he just, I mean,
Yeah.
he just kind of held the rails for Bill Belichick. I mean, that was his
sure,
defense.
100%.
It would be different
100%.
for me if he just
100%.
stepped up there unprovoked, no articles, no noise on social media, and was just like, I do everything right, and now this, that, and the other, but he's not. When he stepped into the podium, sometimes I think what rubs people the wrong way is the fact that he's responding directly to the criticisms we levied against him, that we made loud. You know, and I'm saying we collectively, you know, because he's hearing this stuff. We know that they're tapped in. Dog, they saw freaking Booner drinking a Kool-Aid bath and smashing the beers over himself and talked about this. Yeah, I wouldn't show it, Brad. We know that they hear all this stuff. And I think more than anything, I believe he's telling people, hey, we finally have the team and the organization where we can all be smug, where we can all be the whatever the characteristic that you're levying against them. I think he's telling people, hey, chill out, trust me.
That's true. But you know what? Maybe he's not a dick, but maybe he is a student of this new era that we have called social media, called fans can express themselves whenever they want, where you hear the noise out in the community more than you did before. And maybe he's just a guy, instead of saying, I'm going to shut up and let my actions show, I'm going to respond to stuff.
Go ahead, Mr. JB Smooth.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to add, you guys talking about petty. It just reminds me of the Chappelle show. Yeah, I grind my feet in this couch. The rich motherfucker can buy a new one. But I mean, I think you guys are all right. But I think Terry is mostly right with the fact that being in the NFL, you got to have a little bit of an ego, and you have the right to be a dick. So, hey, Brad, just continue to do what you've been doing. You've got the right to do it. I mean, you have a track record as a GM that's proven otherwise. So now, hey, just continue on that path. But he could care less what we want. He's going to sit here and get everything that he knows the team needs. He could care less about going out there grabbing another edge rusher, because you know what? We probably got something better at home, or he has something else in mind. So just continue on doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I see Desert Stallion in the chat. He says, Uncle Terry isn't wrong. Hell, even when Amon-Ra St. Brown got drafted by the Lions, he said F.
Yeah, but and here's where, before I throw it over to Chase and get like his thoughts on everything, because we've been through a lot in this segment. I am not going to blindly kiss a GM's ass until there's a Super Bowl. I think that I can say that Brad Holmes has done an amazing job. I can say that he's been probably the biggest reason why the Lions have turned it around. However, it does not mean that I'm not going to criticize if I think he F's up. And in this particular case, in my particular opinion, Za'Darius Smith should be on this team right now. He's not. If he's not, it might not be catastrophic. I'm willing to see how it plays out, but that would be something in which if I am giving my opinion about Brad Holmes, I'm going to be like, all right, we'll see what you're doing, but I don't love that.
Does the
If
season
it
start
played out
tomorrow,
the right
Flannel?
way,
No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
But if it plays out his way, does he have the right to clap back at all? That's the
If
whole
it
point.
works, though.
But the only things he said on these podiums are clapbacks.
I understand, but like, there's still no trophies, no Super Bowl trophies in Allen Park. You're not beyond reproach. You're not
Are
deity
these your
figure.
best years as a Lions fan, though?
Absolutely, they are. But
Did he do something that no other GM and coach have been able to do in the entire history of our franchise? We became an NFL franchise?
I understand that, which is why I am 95% of the time very, very complimentary of Brad Holmes. I just don't like. There are literal people probably in this room, probably in this chat, that if the Lions were to sign me, Flannel Sam, as a backup corner, as a 33-year-old slow guy, they'd be like, oh, that's an underrated good signing. That's the type of stuff. He is not beyond reproach. He is the
You
best.
work hard.
I'm a grit guy for sure. Brad Holmes is the greatest GM in Lions history. He's a top 5 GM in the NFL right now. He's done a fantastic job. He is just not above reproach. Everything you're saying, Justin, is true.
But I have a question for Justin, who's clapping back and being all saucy over here. What if this whole thing with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell does not result in a Super Bowl appearance? Would you be okay with that?
What's the window? In 5 years?
I saw a little quiver in his little voice.
No, I do.
I
do
said
think they're going to capitalize, but yeah, it would be a disappointment if they
All
did.
right, Honey Bun, listen to me. I'm going to say this slow.
Let's get that poll.
If the whole Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell era ends with no Super Bowl,
It's a failure.
okay, and
Straight up.
would you be completely happy?
No.
So in other words, a man like Flannel Sam still has some wiggle room. Like, I understand he's taking his organization here, but I still have questions because the journey is not complete.
And I agree with you, but the issue I have with Flannel is jumping to conclusions about Za'Darius Smith and the fact that he's not on this roster yet, when outside of Za'Darius Smith, there's 4 other viable edge rushers that are in free agency right now that haven't signed. So if you don't get Za'Darius Smith and he does need an edge, he can still sign one. The season doesn't start tomorrow. Training camp doesn't even start tomorrow. Training camp doesn't even start for another month.
Okay. Listen to what Brad Holmes is saying. He's basically saying, fuck y'all. We don't need another edge rusher. So shut up. That's what he's saying without saying it.
I'll believe it when week 1 comes around and there's not a different edge rusher other than Marcus Davenport on the other side from Aiden Hutchinson. That's when I'll believe it, and that's when I'll get mad about the edge situation. But after you go through the preseason training camp cuts, and if there's still not another edge in the room, that's when I'll start to be like, I will criticize Brad Holmes for not bringing an edge. But until the first snap of the season starts in week 1, I'm not going to question him because he has all the time in the world to do it.
But just remember, Justin, before I throw it over to Chase, because I promised him 5 minutes ago and then it got a little sidetracked, which I love, by the way, I will always go back to, and this was my take from day one, and it still is my take, he should still be on this team. He should have never been released. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the signing bonus. I don't care about the dead cap.
You would care about the money when the cap rolls over to next year, when we're $14 million over the cap, and we only have $22 million this year.
I think Za'Darius Smith. Care about that I think Za'Darius Smith makes you more of a Super Bowl contender with him than without him.
And that's a very agreeable statement. But, like, the fact is you had to cut him because he was overpaid because you're trying to fix your cap situation for next year.
I don't think he was overpaid. I think the numbers that I gave you earlier suggest that he was actually either rightfully paid.
Like Terry said, he's going to take a hometown discount.
And we'll see. But he doesn't have to accept one because he's been damn good. And if Brad Holmes is trying to lowball him, which I'm sure he is, I don't know.
If it's lower than his contract was last year, then it's a good deal.
These
Absolutely,
other edge
100%.
rushers you talk about, Brad Holmes is not going to sign them. Here's how I know. Za'Darius Smith's cap hit was $11 million. You're talking about dudes who are going to cost $27 million, $30 million, and Brad Holmes has come out and said, we don't need them. Read my lips. Y'all say we need them. I'm saying we don't need them.
And you know what? He said that at the first trade deadline that they made the postseason. He said the same exact thing. He said, y'all keep saying, I got to go out there and get an edge rusher, or else we're not going to win a playoff game, or we're going to have a short run. No, we have enough. We have enough. And what they do, they did something that even some of the most ardent Lions fans didn't think they could. They won a couple games. You know, and that to me, and you have to think about it. From that trade deadline press conference, what did they do? They won you your first NFC North title. They won you your first home playoff game. And they were 20 minutes away from a Super Bowl appearance. And it wasn't because of a lack of what he did or didn't do at the trade deadline to put an edge rusher over there. An edge rusher wasn't going to be the difference in if they made it on. That's the whole point. So it's like he was already there. This story should be one that's over. Not that you can't in a vacuum say, oh, you know what? It would have been nice to be able to see this or see that. But there are people out there, and some of the noise gets to a point to where I can understand why he would feel the need to sometimes be like, hey, I'm going to clap back a little bit. Brian Holmes every now and then, man.
Brad
I
Holmes
got no problem with a
believes
little bit
you
of this.
only need one quality edge rusher. He only got Za'Darius Smith when Aiden Hutchinson was out the whole season. If Aiden Hutchinson doesn't get
they went 15
injured,
and 2.
huh?
And they went 15-2 in the year.
Right. But he is saying you only need one.
And those
We are saying, no, you need two. So we'll see who's going to be right.
And just to respond to what Terry said a couple minutes ago, I am not advocating to go get TJ Watt or Trey Henderson, one of those guys who is paid a bunch of money around the same figure as Za'Darius Smith would be.